A brave gnome with the keenest eye, a loyal shrub with the sharpest wit, and a merry tune carried on the wind. Milo and Gooseberry blazed the trails again. Milo Pierce, accompanied by his trusty awakened shrub companion, Gooseberry, the clever and daring trailblazer who leads the way for discovery and adventure in the uncharted wilderness. Return with us now to those thrilling journeys of yore. Milo and Gooseberry ride the trails once more.
Milo Pierce adjusted his kerchief as he and Gooseberry crested the final rise, the rolling hills giving way to a wide expanse of grassland. Ahead lay the frontier town of Wellspring, a scattering of timber frame buildings clinging to the edge of the wildlands. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the faint hum of quiet activity hinted at a town carrying on with its business, albeit modestly. The town was a simple place. A few homes clustered together near a general store, an inn known as the Crossroads Inn, a doctor's office, and the humble outpost of a unicorn parcel service, colloquially known as the Pony Express. Someone along the way had mentioned that the courier came only once a month, and he wasn't due back for a few weeks. Wellspring, like much of the wildlands frontier, operated on silver and copper coins, and gold was a rare sight. The people here looked like the kind who valued hard work and simplicity above all else. As the gnome and his shrub companion made their way into the heart of the settlement, they drew a few casual glances. Nobody stared or made much of a fuss. In a place as remote as this, a gnome and a walking, talking shrub were peculiar, but hardly the strangest sight these folk might have encountered. Milo tipped his hat at a passing farmer, who gave him a polite nod before continuing down the dusty street. The Crossroads Inn was dimly lit but bustling, and Milo's sharp ears picked up trouble before he even stepped inside. He pushed through the doors, with Gooseberry rustling closely behind. Judy, the tiefling innkeeper, stood firm behind the bar, her hands planted on the counter. Her horns gleamed faintly in the low light, and her fiery eyes burned with defiance. Across from her stood Corncob, a wiry human with sharp features and a perpetual sneer. In one hand, he twirled a folding knife, the blade glinting dangerously as it snapped open and shut with practiced ease. Behind him loomed his small gang of menacing thugs. "You're not listening, Judy," Corncob said, his voice dripping with false congeniality. "Me and my boys are patient fellas, but we've got limits, see? You don't pay up, you're gonna be sorry." Judy leaned forward, her voice steady and unyielding. "I've paid you more than enough, Corncob. I'm done lining your pockets while you and your gang make a mess of this town." Corncob leered at the innkeeper. "You're making a mistake, sweetheart. A big one." The tension in the room was thick, and Milo glanced around at the other patrons. A few loggers from the nearby lumber camp sat hunched at a corner table, avoiding eye contact. Hunters and trappers nursed their drinks in silence, their gazes fixed firmly on their mugs. Nobody moved to intervene. Corncob finally stepped back, snapping his knife shut with a flourish. "Fine," he said, his tone icy. "Have it your way. But don't say I didn't warn you." With a sharp motion, he turned and sauntered toward the door, his gang trailing after him like a pack of jackals. The doors swung shut behind them, leaving an uneasy quiet in their wake. Judy straightened, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She cast a withering look at the patrons. "Cowards," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You're all too scared to stand up to him, and for what? So he can bleed this town dry while you sit here and do nothing?" Milo cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Pardon me, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's Milo Pierce, and this here's Gooseberry. We couldn't help overhearing. Sounds like you've got a bit of a problem." Judy looked him over, her sharp eyes softening slightly. "That's putting it mildly. Corncob's been running this racket for years. Takes whatever he wants, and no one's got the guts to stop him." Milo frowned, glancing at the silent patrons. "Why don't you all stand up to him?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough reproach to make a few heads turn. "You've got enough folks here to put up a fight." One of the trappers snorted with derisive laughter. "Stand up to Corncob and his boys? They're twice as mean as we are, little man. You wouldn't last a minute." "Rotten to the core, that Corncob," muttered a logger at the bar. "Always has been. Milo straightened, his hand resting on the hilt of his short sword. "I've faced my share of bullies," he said, his tone resolute. "I'll fight by your side, and we'll show this Corncob and his gang that they can't push your town around anymore." The room erupted in laughter, stinging Milo's spirit. The logger who had spoken before clapped his companion on the back. "Look at him. Brave little gnome thinks he's gonna lead the charge." Milo's face burned, but he held his ground. "You've got the numbers," he said firmly. "All you need to do is stand up for yourselves." But his words fell on deaf ears. The laughter continued, and Milo felt Gooseberry's quiet presence at his side, a steadying force amid the ridicule. Finally, Milo turned on his heel and headed for the door, Gooseberry following close behind. Outside, the midday sun felt harsher, the weight of the town's apathy pressing on him. As they stepped onto the porch, they found an older man sitting in a worn chair, calmly smoking a rolled leaf. His hat cast a shadow over his weathered face, but his keen eyes glinted with quiet wisdom. "You gave it your best shot," the man said, his voice low and even. "Can't fault you for that." Milo paused, studying the man. "You don't seem afraid like the others," he said. The man chuckled softly, exhaling a thin trail of smoke. "Folks call me Doc," he said. "And I've been around long enough to know fear can settle deep in a person's bones. These folks have been living under Corncob's thumb for so long, they've forgotten they can stand tall." Milo tilted his head, considering. "So what's the answer, Doc?" The older man leaned back, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Sometimes, you just gotta remind people who they are. Show them they're stronger than they think." Milo nodded slowly. "Then that's what I'll do." The next morning, Milo stood in the clearing behind the Crossroads Inn, staring up at a woodcutter's axe propped against a stack of logs. The axe was nearly as tall as he was, and the blade looked heavy and worn. Determined, Milo grabbed the handle, hefting it with both hands. With a deep breath, he swung it over his head and brought it down, only for the blade to barely dent the log before its weight pulled him forward, nearly toppling him over. A booming laugh echoed from behind. "Well, look at this. A little fellow trying to chop like a giant." Milo spun around to see two towering lumberjacks approaching. They resembled carnival strongmen, full of muscle and confidence. One sported a bushy mustache that curled at the ends, while the other had a bright red bandana tied around his head. Both men's arms were as thick as tree trunks. "Why don't you let us take over, friend?" suggested the man with the mustache, who Milo learned was named Bruno. He effortlessly lifted the axe, placed a new log on the block, and split it in half with a single, graceful swing, the blade slicing through the wood with a resonant crack. "Not bad, Bruno," said the other, known as Rex, his arms folded. "But you're looking at Wellspring's true champion of the chop." With that, Rex took his turn, adding flair to his swing and splitting the log with theatrical prowess. The two lumberjacks then took turns, each trying to outdo the other, making the act of chopping wood into a grand performance. They spun around, tossed logs into the air before cleaving them, and boasted loudly with each successful chop. "See that, Rex?" Bruno boasted after another smooth slice. "Clean as a whistle. Nobody splits wood like I do." "That? Sloppy," Rex countered, stepping up for another round. "I'm the top axe wielder in Wellspring, no contest." Their rivalry quickly turned into a playful wrestling match. The two men grappled, trying to pin each other, their boisterous claims of strength filling the air. Milo watched with a grin. These men were brash and competitive, but they had the kind of raw power the town needed to stand up to a bully like Corncob. "With strength like that, you two could be real heroes," he remarked, though neither could hear him over their own shouting and laughing. Later that afternoon, Milo found himself on the edge of town, crouching in the tall grass. A chipmunk had run off with his neckerchief, and he was determined to get it back. "You'll never catch it like that," came a voice behind him. Milo looked back to see two men approaching. One was a hunter, carrying a bow and quiver, while the other was a trapper with snares hanging from his belt. They both looked amused. "I'll bet 5 rolls of leaf I catch it before you do," the hunter said to his companion, grinning. "You're on," the trapper replied, already crouching to set a snare. The two men turned the chase into a competition. The hunter crept low, moving through the grass with the quiet precision of a predator, while the trapper set up clever snares in the chipmunk's path. Despite their efforts, the little creature darted and dodged, evading them at every turn. Finally, Gooseberry stepped forward, shaking his leafy branches. As the chipmunk darted past, Gooseberry snagged the neckerchief on one of his twigs. The chipmunk froze, squeaked in frustration, and then scampered away. The hunter and trapper laughed, brushing the dirt off their hands. "Well, guess we'll call it a draw," the hunter said. As they walked away, Milo knelt down and placed a small acorn on the ground with a smile and a wink. The chipmunk poked its head out of the brush, sniffing at the offering before grabbing it and disappearing again. That evening, Milo returned to the Crossroads Inn. Judy was behind the bar, wiping down the counter with a well-worn rag. She glanced up as he entered, raising an eyebrow. "You've been busy," she said. "Word gets around fast in a place like this. Folks are saying you've got the lumberjacks chopping wood like circus acts and the hunters chasing chipmunks." Milo shrugged with a small smile. "Just doing what I can to remind people of their strengths." Judy snorted, shaking her head. "Strength's one thing, but it won't be enough. These people need a leader, someone they trust. And no offense, honey, but a fella just ain't gonna take you seriously when you're staring him in the crotch." Milo chuckled, climbing onto a barstool to meet her gaze. "You're right about that. But they already have a leader, you." Judy blinked, caught off guard. "Me? Don't be ridiculous. Everyone in this town looks up to you," Milo said. "They listen to you. If anyone can rally them, it's you. They just need to see you believe in them." Judy was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. Then a slow, determined smile spread across her face. "You're a clever little rascal, Milo Pierce. All right. Let's give these folks something to fight for." Milo grinned. He could see the fire returning to her eyes. Wellspring's fight wasn't over, it was just getting started. The next day, the Crossroads Inn was unusually lively. Patrons filled the tables, chatting in hushed tones and casting glances toward the door. A sense of anticipation hung in the air. Judy moved between the bar and the tables, pouring drinks with a steady hand but speaking little. Behind her calm demeanor, there was a quiet tension, a readiness for what was to come. Milo and Gooseberry sat in a corner, watching the room. The lumberjacks leaned against the bar, their massive arms crossed as they whispered to each other, grinning like boys spoiling for a fight. The hunter and trapper sat near the window, pretending to play cards while keeping one eye on the door. Gooseberry, as usual, stood still as a shadow, but the way his branches twitched now and then betrayed his awareness. "Think they'll come?" Milo asked quietly, adjusting his short sword at his side. Judy's voice cut through the murmurs. "Oh, they'll come. Corncob's too greedy not to." As if on cue, the door to the inn creaked open, and a gust of wind carried in the scent of dust and trouble. Corncob swaggered inside, twirling his folding knife in one hand. Behind him came 4 of his boys, their faces hardened and eyes scanning the room. Corncob stopped in the center of the inn, flipping his knife closed with a sharp click. "Judy," he drawled, his voice oily and mocking. "I don't remember seeing a payment from you last week. Or the week before that. Now, me and my boys, we don't like being ignored. Makes us feel unappreciated." Judy stepped out from behind the bar, her hands on her hips. Her voice was steady, her eyes fierce. "I'm gonna give you just one chance to walk your sorry ass out that door and down the road, and don't you ever come back here again, you got that?" Corncob blinked, then laughed, a short, sharp bark. "You're funny, Judy. Real funny. But I think you've forgotten who's holding the knife here." In a flash, Corncob's knife was open again, the blade glinting in the dim light as he pointed it toward her. "Maybe I need to remind you who's in charge." Before Corncob could take a step, the lumberjacks sprang into action. With a roar, they grabbed 2 of Corncob's men by the arms, hoisting them off the ground like sacks of grain. The surprised bandits struggled, but the lumberjacks' iron grips held firm. "Looks like you boys picked the wrong town," Mustache Man said with a grin, shaking the bandit in his hands for emphasis. At the same moment, the hunter and trapper yanked on a rope they'd inconspicuously laid across the floor. The remaining 2 bandits stumbled and fell, crashing to the ground with curses. Gooseberry loomed over them, rustling his branches threateningly. Corncob's smirk disappeared as he spun toward the bar. That's when Milo sprang up from behind it, landing lightly on the counter. In one swift motion, Milo drew his short sword and knocked the knife from Corncob's hand. The blade clattered onto the bar, embedding itself in the wood. Corncob staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and fury. "You wily little." "Careful what you say next," Milo interrupted, his voice sharp and commanding. "You're outnumbered and outmatched." Corncob glanced around the room. His boys were either pinned by the lumberjacks or sprawled on the floor. The patrons who had once ignored his threats now stood tall, their eyes filled with a quiet defiance. Judy stood at the center of it all, her arms crossed, her gaze unwavering. Corncob sneered, backing toward the door. "This ain't over," he muttered. "You'll be sorry." "You'd better keep walking," Judy said, her voice cold. Corncob turned and fled, his gang scrambling after him. The door swung shut behind them, and for a moment, the inn was silent. Then a cheer erupted from the townsfolk, their voices loud and jubilant. Judy turned to Milo, a smile breaking across her face. "Well, I'll be. You really pulled it off, little man." Milo grinned, sheathing his sword. "It wasn't just me. You all had it in you. You just needed a reminder." The next morning, Milo and Gooseberry stood at the edge of Wellspring, their packs ready for the next leg of their journey. Judy and a few others from the town had gathered to see them off. "I can't thank you enough," Judy said, holding out a small pouch of coins. "It's not much, but it's all we can spare." Milo shook his head. "Keep it. Use it to make Wellspring stronger. Just promise me one thing, teach the others those tunes I showed you." Judy nodded. "You've got my word. Any traveler from your village will know they're among friends here." With a final wave, Milo and Gooseberry set off, the sun rising high over the grasslands. Behind them, the town of Wellspring stood a little taller, its people a little braver.
And so, Milo Pierce and his loyal shrub companion Gooseberry ride off once more, blazing trails and forging friendships across the uncharted wilderness. Until next time, keep your wits sharp, your mind open, and your heart true, and you just might hear the scout's tune carried on the wind.